Nice and shiny, you see? Keep nice and shiny here.
We've just arrived at Tolhurst Organic. This is Lynn's veg shed, which was built in 2018. It's full of lots of veganic goodies, which are grown on the farm. It's run on a wonderful system where people serve themselves, work out how much they have to pay, and put their money into the honesty box. Is this the future of shopping? Sounds good to me.
Ian Tolhurst is the founder of the farm and has been active in the organic movement for over 40 years. He has received a number of awards, including the 2016 Soil Farmer of the Year. He is the co-author of Growing Green, Organic Techniques for a Sustainable Future, and his latest book, Back to the Earth, is a compilation of his articles.
My name is Ian Tolhurst. This is Tolhurst Organic Partnership. We are a community interest company. We have a site here in South Oxfordshire, total just about 19 acres. Behind us, you can see this is part of the wall garden, very old wall garden. We've got two fields. We're commercial producers. We've been producing organic vegetables for a long time, since 1976, and we became fully stock-free vegan, if you like, veganic, from from the year 2003, I think. I'm not sure about that date, actually. So we've been stock-free vegan for nearly 20 years. We grow a whole range of fruits and vegetables, pretty much everything you can imagine in the vegetable line. We do over 100 different types of vegetables. We do a lot of fruit. We grow strawberries. This year we just picked 2,000 kilograms of strawberries. We're small-scale producers, but we're quite large small-scale producers. We're producing around 120, 140 tons of food every year, and we're doing it completely without any animal inputs at all. There's no use of any animal manures, there's no use of any livestock grazing, we don't use any fertilisers, organic or otherwise, we don't use any sprays, any inputs whatsoever. The system is really dependent on green manures, so we're using green manures within a rotation on the farm. We're using wood chip, either ramule chip wood or wood chip which we compost and make a beautiful compost. We do all our own plant raising. We raise about 100,000 plants a year for planting out into the field, and we're very keen to try and develop the farm increasingly as a place where people can come and see what we're doing here, how we produce food, and how we can actually exist in terms of food production without the use of livestock. And that's really important, because I feel that the future of the planet is heavily dependent on serious reduction of livestock units on farms, because all the reasons we know they are very consumptive of energy and food and land and resources. So we're able to demonstrate here on the farm in a practical way, in a relatively small scale, but something which could be scaled up to a much larger farm, that you can produce ample amounts of food on land which is less than ideal. This is not by any means good quality land, it's actually quite low grade land, but you can do it on very reasonably accessible land and produce a good amount of food, which is really what we are. We're farmers, we grow food for people, that's what we do. We work really closely with biodiversity. In fact, the whole farm is really geared towards a very intense use of biodiversity in the natural way. So we encourage biodiversity by planting certain areas of the farm with wildlife strips, wildlife corridors, hedges we manage in a very specific way. We have a lot of interaction with all the local bird life and animal. We may be stock free with no animals, but we've got plenty of badgers and deer and other things moving around. So we're very much about looking after biodiversity, and the biodiversity is the way we manage our pest and disease, potentially our pest and disease problems, which we have almost none, very few problems. So it's really about working very close with natural systems without relying on importing huge amounts of fertility from somewhere else, because many farms, particularly intensive vegetable farms, are very dependent on bringing fertility from another farm, particularly organic farms. And that's something we've decided many years ago we didn't want to become part of. So it's really about managing fertility from within our own farm boundaries. And that's where we're going. It's a continually developing situation. We're learning as we go. We've got a lot of trials work here. We're closely linked to the Organic Research Centre. We have a whole range of trials going on, looking very much at the use of stockless systems, and we're getting some really useful and interesting data coming out as a result of those trials in terms of looking at our soil quality, organic matter content, and we've been able to show quite clearly that our soil is improving, our yields are improving, and the biodiversity around the farm is also improving. So it's really about working very closely with nature and developing a whole systems approach with what we have around us, which is a bounty of nature. We're very lucky, we do live in a part of the country which is not heavily intensified with agriculture, so that helps of course, but even in those situations, what we grow here, what we do here would also work as a working example.
I've been following what Tolly's doing here for about a year now, and I'm really interested. I think he's onto something very important, which is getting away from livestock and from artificial fertilisers at the same time, and allowing the soil, which is a fantastically complex system, to do what it does best, which is constantly to repair itself, to build these amazingly complex relationships between plants and fungi, bacteria, the soil animals, which basically means that the soil is healthy and can continue indefinitely to support crops. And I think that is a big part of what will get us through this century and get us away from the model which smashes the basis of our subsistence, which is the soil.
Hello, I'm Zoe and I work for Tolhurst Organic, and I live in this building which was funded by the Vegan Organic Network very kindly. It's a beautiful little building and we've got a little kitchen here, bathrooms there, and stairs going around the outside upstairs to where I live in a little loft room upstairs, which is lovely and I love it.
The higher value things like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, all the greenhouse and tunnel crops, plus some outdoor cropping, plus we do all the plant raising here, which is critical. The plant raising really runs the whole business. So Romney's doing the plant raising here in the garden, and there's about 50,000 this year, I think, modules. And I tend to do the peg plants, that's the bare root ones, which is another 40 or 50,000. So we're growing around 100,000 plants in total, which sounds a lot, but I know growers using 10 million, so it's not that big. We are considered to be small scale. This is small scale horticulture. Large scale horticulture organically does exist. It tends to be people just growing 4 or 5 crops on a very large field scale. So they might be doing carrots, onions, cabbage and beetroot, and that's it. And they'll do maybe 50 acres of each. That does happen. The largest carrot growers in the UK, conventional carrot growers in the UK, they produce 80% of all conventional carrots, and the largest organic producers in the UK also produce 80% of all carrots. And it's the same farms, it's the same family, same farm business. They also do organic. So much of organic nowadays is quite large scale, so we're very much small scale bottom end of that market, and we're aiming primarily for the local market. We're not interested in wholesale, we're not interested in supermarkets. We're too small deal with those people. Their requirements are too exacting. We wouldn't get very good price for the product. We'd only get maybe less than half what we get now. So the marketing of the product is really important, and we need to be selling direct to consumer. We wouldn't be able to make this pay economically if we were going through a third party wholesaler or intermediary. So it's really dependent on selling direct to the consumer, and we've always done that. In the last few years we had to start wholesaling because demand was getting difficult on the local level. We've gone away from that in the last 3 months. COVID has changed everything. Our biggest problem always was selling, now our biggest problem is producing enough to cater to the market. Suddenly everything changed overnight, that we now have a much better, stronger, secure and I hope sustainable market. So we've dropped the wholesale, which never made money, and we no longer do local farmers markets either, because they didn't make money either. So we're really concentrating now really on just what we can sell direct from the farm, and that's the box scheme, which takes about 60% of our product, and the veg shed, which is taking 40%. In fact, the veg shed is growing all the time. So we're really concentrating on selling direct from the farm. It's really important. And we are now at a state for the first time in many years when we are expanding our production. We haven't expanded now for the last 15 years, but we are now thinking about expanding, and I am looking for maybe a bit more land at some point. So things are looking good at the minute, but it changes from month to month. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's around the corner, but this year's been, for us, it's been particularly good. It's been a really good year, and we hope that continues for a while, at least to the end of the year anyway. Right, the garden, I'm not going to go into too much detail of the garden, other than we could kind of breeze through, but the garden's divided up into plots. There's 9 plots. It's actually it's slightly complicated because I've changed it, but there's a 7-year rotation in the garden. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we'll do that in the field, but it's a 7-year rotation, so we've got different crops at different points in the rotation. We've taken out a lot of the crops we used to grow in the garden and now gone to the field because it's much easier to grow in the field. It's a larger scale, it's less work, it's much easier to harvest, and we can get yields as good, almost as good in the field as we get in the garden. There's no doubt about the fact that if you produce working solely by hand without machinery, you produce a lot more. The most productive farms are not the big farms, they are the very small farms, relying totally on human labour. So we can get higher yields in the garden, primarily because it's more human attention than we do in the field. The problem is the cost of paying that labour. So we've taken out the crops which we can grow easily in the field, larger scale, and left the garden to the higher value, smaller area crops. So what we're looking at here is lettuce. So this whole plot last year was in brassica, this year it's in lettuce. And we're planting every 2 to 3 weeks, we plant around 700 to 800 lettuce. That's how many we use in that period of time. So we're now on the 4th sowing, 4th planting. The 5th one's in the greenhouse, there's 2 or 3 more to go. So in the course of one season, that piece of ground there will produce something like around 8 or 10,000 lettuces, of which we'll probably sell most of them. I mean, there's always some wastage. You end up chucking some out because they go to seed or it gets too hot or something. But so far we've almost cut everything, which is unusual. We usually get some wastage. That will then go back into green manure. As soon as it's finished in the autumn, that goes back into green manure. So as soon as the ground is empty, it gets re-sown with a green manure crop, and it's really important to keep ground covered. So we're keeping it covered as much as possible, particularly during the winter. To leave bare soil like that in the winter is really bad news because of problems of erosion. It's quite steep. The soil is prone to erosion. It's that type of soil. So we're keeping it covered as much as possible, either with a green manure or with an actual growing crop. All the work's done by hand, apart from initial ground preparation. So it's hand planting, hand hoeing. They'd be hoed. They haven't been hoed yet, have they, this lot? But they will get hoed when it dries, if it dries. They get hoed once. That's about it. We don't do much weeding as such. We don't do any hand weeding on lettuce because it's ready in about 4 or 5 weeks, so it's really fast. So it's quite an easy crop to grow actually. It's not difficult to grow. Most of the work is really in the planting and the harvesting. So Charlie, you did the harvesting this morning. How long was it? An hour and a half, 2 hours?
Very quick for 130 or something.
Yeah. So you did more than 130 actually, I think. And they harvested and it's going off. I mean, everything gets delivered today. So things like lettuce we harvest almost at a point of sale really. It has to be quite close because you've only got a day or two and it goes off. Beyond here we have another plot which is in courgettes, which we'll walk over to.
I'm not really meant to be on this farm walk, but there's actually nothing to do.
Right. They invited you, didn't they? So this is an example really where we're using green manures, what I call it in a relay form. So we're actually relaying green manures into a crop. Last year this was growing beans. So if you look over there, we'll see in a minute where the beans are. That was all undersown with this green manure crop, which is now growing here. The following year it goes into courgettes. So where the beans were is where the courgettes are this year. There's 3 different sowings. The first 2 are, they look a bit scrappy. They got frosted in May and they've suffered quite a lot in May because it was cold. These are later sowings, so we've only just started picking these in the last couple of weeks. The green manure gets mown off, so we're presently mowing the edges, but we will mow the whole crop quite soon. and the material gets left on the ground. We don't take anything away. So the green manure is left in situ. It's a legume. It's a mixture of legumes. There's about 7 or 8 different species of legume, fixing nitrogen from the air, putting it back in the ground, and it's feeding the soil. We're not feeding the crop, we're feeding the soil. And this is important. We don't feed crops, we feed soil. We let the crops take what they want themselves. We're not interested in trying to analyse how much nitrogen, phosphate and potash each plant wants and trying to give it that. We allow the plant to choose what it needs for its own demand. And that way you get a much more nutritious plant. You also get a plant which is more able to resist pests and diseases. But the green manure is more than just developing fertility. It's also about encouraging biodiversity. And if you look around here, we've got all this stuff growing. This is not weeds by accident. All this is actually designed, managed habitat. Behind us we've got strips of wildflowers. This was sown some years ago. It's all there to encourage predatory insects. So the green manure is part of that system. It allows predatory insects to thrive. It gives them pollen, which they need, nectar, and also places to hang out. And with the way we manage these green manure crops and this biodiversity is very important. If we just keep mowing it, we're actually doing a lot of damage. So we're leaving everything to flower as much as possible. That's why you can see in here there's red clover. Underneath there's white clover, which you can't see, but when this is mown, the white clover will come up and that will flower. So we have continuous flowering operations. So we're trying to aim for this biodiversity to flower as long as possible throughout the whole year. And it doesn't really start until April, but it can go right through to September, October. The whole growing season primarily is about trying to maintain this biodiversity. Biodiversity is the driver of the farm. It really is the most important thing we do. And years ago, if you asked me, what do you grow? I say, we grow vegetables, carrots, potatoes. Actually, the question now is, what do you grow? Is we grow biodiversity, and the vegetables are a byproduct of that. Because the biodiversity is a driver. It's the leading point of the whole farm. The whole farm is here to develop biodiversity, and on the back of that we can grow vegetables. And we produce a lot. We're producing around 140 tonnes a year. Last year was quite a bit more than that. We had a really good year. So 140 tonnes of food. This is what we grow, 140 tonnes of food every year. And that's really dependent on this biodiversity. So the green manure is not just about building soil fertility. It's not just about putting organic matter back in the soil and improving carbon. It's also about encouraging biodiversity, which is really essential to what we do. So once the courgettes are finished, they'll die off, the frost will kill them. The green manure will actually spread into that gap because there's trefoil growing here which kind of creeps sideways, and that will more or less cover the gap. So next year this will just be green manure on its own. There will be no crop here at all. So in the course of the rotation we have 6 years of cropping and 4 years of green manure, because we have the green manure in the crop as well. So we're combining cropping with green manures, which means we actually build fertility at the same time as harvesting a crop. This is a novel approach which nobody ever attempted to do in horticulture. I was the first person to attempt this, to actually have green manures in a crop growing that you can harvest. And this is being used by other people now. The technology is starting to catch on, and it does work. It takes quite precise management in terms of getting the green manure in at the right time and growing the crop at the right time, but it does work very well, and it means we don't have to bring hardly anything into the system. I mean, the system we have here is more or less self-sufficient. We're not dependent on bringing in large amounts of manure from farms, which is problematical. We don't have to bring in large amounts of fertiliser or rock dust or anything of that type at all. We're really using the fertility from within the farm, and this is important because farms have to be seen to be able to maintain themselves more or less. I mean, we bring in seeds, obviously, packaging, other materials, but we're trying as far as possible to maintain the fertility of the farm from within the farm. And the rotation, the way we rotate crops around the field and the garden, is really very much a part of that maintenance of fertility and keeping the biodiversity alive. If you've got any questions, you have to speak up, because I can talk non-stop, you see, for 7 hours. Anything? No? Okay. We'll go to the next part then. If you... Sorry? Oh, okay, yeah. Well, it's fine, isn't it? Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks a lot. Thank you to come back when you've got... If you have a look in here, it's not such a great day because it's a bit cool and cloudy, but if you look at this, you'll see a massive amount of insects hanging around. And a lot of growers freak out when they see insects. Oh, what's it eating? Well, actually, 85 or 90% of them don't eat plants. They eat other insects. So they're all mostly predatory insects that live on other things. And every flower has its own specific type of insect. And I can't see because I haven't got glasses on, but I know there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. There'll be hoverflies, there'll be lacewings, there'll be ladybirds, all the things which we recognise as being useful for controlling pests. But there's also a whole lot of stuff that we don't recognise, little tiny things, really tiny things called the fertilisers, which live on aphids. Aphids are predated by everything. Aphids should never be a problem in horticulture because everything else wants to eat aphids. But there's this interesting statistic that one pair of aphids in one season can actually breed and produce the weight of the planet in one season if they weren't eaten by something else. I don't know who did the sums on this, and I think it's probably an exaggeration anyway, but it's an illustration of just how much two aphids can become if left unchecked. And the reason they don't is because so many things want to eat them. If I was an aphid, I'd be feeling incredibly paranoid because everything's out to get you. So conventional agriculture, horticulture like this, on a conventional sense, their biggest pest problem is aphids. Huge problem with aphids because they can't control them, because their soil is unhealthy, because their nutrition is bad, because they chuck nitrogen on everything, it produces aphids. Even organic nitrogen will produce aphids. Just because it's organic doesn't mean that it's good. Organic nitrogen is the same as chemical nitrogen. If you put loads of shit on something, you're going to get loads of aphids. So, looking after soil is really important in terms of reducing the problems of pests and disease, but also having that rich biodiversity around, very close. We've got these bits of flowers all over the place. We've got nettles. Nettles are one of the greatest ways of improving your pest-predator relationship because nettles are full of aphids. Right, that's where they all go. The aphids go in the nettles. They feel safe, but they're not because all the predators go there as well. So the nettles are a really important source of aphid predatory insects, and that's why we leave them. Years ago, when I first started growing, my biggest fear was pest, diseases and weeds. So I did whatever I could to get rid of pests, get rid of disease, get rid of weeds. Completely wrong approach, because you can never annihilate these things. It's impossible. Horticulture and agriculture has been saying they're going to annihilate pest, diseases and weeds ever since it's been around. It still hasn't happened. So, we work with those things. We work with pest, diseases and weeds. We appreciate the value they bring us because often they will show you something's not right. If you have a serious pest problem, it's not because they're victimising us as farmers, because we've done something wrong. So pests are a really useful indicator of something wrong with your system. And if we did get a pest problem, I need to ask what is it we've done that's encouraged this pest to become a problem, because naturally it wouldn't happen. And around here we have, I can safely say, apart from mammals, at the moment we have absolutely zero pest problems, and that's pretty much every year. There's odd things crop up from time to time, but in general pests are very, very much not a part of our system at all. Our biggest problem at the minute is badgers. It's the big mammals that tend to cause the problems, and we have to keep them out in various ways. So pests are not really a problem to us at all, apart from birds and mammals. Behind this we got an area of green manure. Last year that was courgettes. You can vaguely see the lines where the courgettes were sort of. It's all covered in, so we've got a mixture of white clover, red clover and chicory, trefoil, and there was a bunch of wildflowers which didn't work very well. And the idea of that is this long-term fertility building crop. So we're building fertility through the use of plants. So rather than bringing material in, we're using nature really as a way of improving organic matter. We will spread a little bit of compost in the garden, very small amounts. Once every 7 years we apply compost, and that will go on to this in the autumn or in the spring next year. And it's wood chip compost, which we'll see when we get to the field. The reason we have a range of different plants is every plant has a different root system. They all have a different effect on the soil. The chicory is really deep. This is the beautiful blue one you see. It goes very deep. It has a very deep taproot. It brings up nutrients from lower down. And also the seeds are really valuable for birds in the winter. Goldfinches and greenfinches, they all come here in the winter for seeds. The field is full of them in the winter. We have a lot more chicory in the field. We have a different green manure in the field. In the garden, because it's small scale, we have to manage it in a different way. But in the field we have tractors, which makes it a whole lot easier. So this will stay in now until next year. And then next year this goes into cabbage family. All this will be growing cabbages next spring. Cabbages in Calabrese primarily, because there's lots of fertility there, a lot of nitrogen from the clovers, live organic matter. The soil will be in really good condition. This soil here in the garden has been used intensively for probably 1,000 years, and probably before that. This has been a farm for a long time, this bit of ground. So the land has been heavily used, and during the war it was even more heavily used, and we've inherited 2 quite serious diseases. We have verticillium wilt and allium white rot, none of which I realised we had until I got here. You don't find these things out until you've done it for a year. So the rotation's really geared towards reducing the problems of those 2 quite serious diseases, so we don't have the same family going in the same ground for at least 5 to 6 years. Like onions, we have 9 years between family, not 7 years between family groups in the garden, because with those diseases we could suffer huge crop losses. In fact, we did when we first came here. We had serious losses with onions. We couldn't grow onions, it was so bad. But now we've got a rotation going, and we're using green manures as a way of cleaning the ground, and also reducing the effect of those diseases has meant that we can produce a much better crop. So the rotation is really key to not just avoiding the problems of pest and disease, but also key to actually controlling these diseases if you do have them. A lot of horticultural land has got inherent disease problems, primarily because of poor rotations in the past. And in this instance, during the war, the whole garden was growing mostly tomatoes and peppers and aubergines, so there was a massive, they're all the same family group, Cyanosus family, and this encouraged the verticillium wilt to come out of control, and once you've got it, it's there forever. It's 50-60 years at least before it will start to reduce. So we've inherited this problem primarily because of bad management in the past. And you know, it's going to take a long time to get rid of these diseases. In fact, we're talking almost geological time spans, but we are able to crop susceptible crops because we have this rotation which reduces the effect of disease down to a level where we can tolerate. We do see some disease at times, but we can tolerate that. It doesn't have a huge impact on the crop. This year we haven't got any sign of onion white rot, which is the first time ever. I don't know why.
You say Sicilian wilt?
Verticillium.
Verticillium.
Do you want a Latin name?
Yeah, okay.
It's verticillium, Verticillium, verticillium Dahlae, Dahlae. It's quite a common disease. It's particularly common for strawberry growers, which is how we discovered we had it, because we were growing strawberries here the first year. It affects a whole range of families, all the Cyanosus family, sunflowers, artichokes, peppers, aubergines, raspberries, even some brassica family. So it's a serious disease, and it's not one you would choose to have. If you've got onion white rot, it's only onions, but verticillium affects a whole range of family groups. It's not just specific to the Cyanosus family. We also have the weed, which carries it here, where it's not so much now, but we used to have a big problem with nightshade, which is Cyanosus weed, and that propagated it as well. So these things can work against you, but we've managed to deal with it. We use some biofumigation now. Before we plant strawberries, we biofumigate, so we actually grow a specific green manure, which is a brassica, which is bred specifically for this purpose. So we biofumigate, and that reduces the level of disease down to a very manageable level. In fact, with strawberries we've seen virtually no verticillium wilt at all since we've been doing this, so it's had a big effect.
Can you explain what biofumigating is, please?
Yeah, so biofumigation is the growing of a crop. So it grows very tall, it grows about this tall. It's a brassica. It's turned into the ground, and it gives off a gas. It is a fumigation. It gives off a gas. I can't remember the active ingredient. It's something like isocyanate, but it's not. You'll look it up, George. I'm sure.
I did. I think isopropionate, something like that.
It's got a name. The active ingredient, and that actually reduces the level of disease. It also reduces the level of a whole lot of nematodes and other diseases. It also reduces a lot of biological activity in the soil. So actually, it can be quite damaging. So what we do, if we biofumigate, we add compost afterwards to reintroduce some of the bacteria and fungi we've lost through that process. So even organic processes can be damaging. People think because it's organic it's good. It's not always good. Years ago we used to use pyrethrum and deris for aphid problems when we had aphid problems, and these are natural pesticides, but they kill everything. They kill all pests, all insects, which means the predators go as well. So because it's organic, it isn't necessarily good. So we are aware of this, and we only use it when we need to. It's within a rotation. It's only for strawberries. We don't do it for anything else, although I have considered doing it for tomatoes, but it's slightly difficult to because it's tunnels and we don't want to give the space up for too long. But it does work. It was developed primarily for strawberry growers who were heavily dependent on methyl bromide, which got banned. We were the last country in Europe, I think, to ban it, as ever. And they had to have something else, so they developed this biofumigation, which has been known about for a long time, but never, they say necessity is the mother of invention. It wasn't until the methyl bromide got taken away that the process of biofumigation suddenly took off. But strawberry growers now still want to carry on growing strawberries in the same field forever, so they biofumigate every 3 or 4 years, which is, I think, actually really the wrong approach, And with strawberries, we rotate. We don't come back to the same piece of ground for 20 years. It's that long, which means we can't grow 17 acres of strawberries. We're going to grow half an acre, and that's what we do. We grow half an acre. So yeah, strawberries. We've got strawberries along the top there. Both the plots up there in strawberries, and this year, well, Charlie, you were one of them. I didn't hardly pick any, but we did manage to pick 2,000 kilograms of strawberries this year, which was probably the most we've ever picked. That's mostly from these 2 plots here, plus a bit in the tunnel and some in the field, but not huge amounts in the field. But most of it actually came from the garden, so incredibly productive. Strawberries are hugely productive if you get it right.
Sorry, Tolly. One other question. You mentioned a very small insect that eats aphids.
Yeah, Aphidoletes. Aphidoletes. That's just one of millions of insects that eat aphids. You don't want to come back in your next life as an aphid. Right, moving on a bit. Right, the beans, these have been sown, these 2 rows were sown in pots, so Romney produced these in pots, using our own potting compost which we make. I'll show you about that later. We do different varieties, and this is something we do across the whole farm. Everything's not just one variety. So here we've got 3 varieties of beans. Carrots, for example, we have 4 varieties. Courgettes, we've got 4. Strawberries, we only have 1. Strawberries is the only crop we only have 1 variety of. Out of the 100 different vegetables we grow, all of them, I think most of them, have got more than 1 variety. So yeah, we grow 100 different types of vegetable. We actually sow, I did this up Romney recently, we do around 350 sowings every year. That's nearly 1 a day, which means that some days we do 4 or 5, and other days we don't do any at all. So we're not sowing, in November, December and January, but we're sowing every other month. So 9 months a year we're sowing crops. This is very intensive stuff. A farmer doing arable crops might sow 3 crops, on 1,000 acres. We're sowing more than 300. So it's all very, very small scale. It's quite a management nightmare, to be honest. And a lot depends on the weather, of course, but it's very intensive. So different varieties are really important because we want different colours and different shapes, because we've got purple beans, here we've got green beans, we've got flat beans, we've got round beans, we've got long beans. Because we're dealing direct with the customer, we want to offer as much choice as possible, and we want to fool them into thinking they're getting different vegetables every week. So we just put a different colour cabbage in. So 1 week it's a red cabbage, 1 week it's a green. It's cabbage, and of course they all taste different. But they probably wouldn't choose to do that if they were going out to the shops. But because it goes through the bot scheme, they have to accept what we decide they want to eat that week. And it's really as much to do with our convenience as it is theirs. So we try and make it work for them. Of course we have to. This has all been undersown. You can see this kind of green haze. This is not weeds. There are a few weeds, but it's pretty clean. This is the green manure you're looking at over there. It's the same thing. Okay, it's very young, so it's only just started, and it was sown about a week ago. No, maybe 2. But 2, because it came up in 3 days. Yeah. It's a mixture of red clover, white clover, yellow trefoil. There's a bit of chicory. I can't remember if I put wildflowers in it now.
I think it was red and white clover, trefoil and chicory, I think.
Yeah, it was red and white clover, trefoil and chicory. Yeah, we've left out the wildflowers in the garden because it gets cut too early. We use the wildflowers more in the field. And that'll be left to grow. So that'll grow under the beans. And what we'll do next year would be growing courgettes here. So the courgettes will grow in exactly the same place where the beans are. We don't take anything away. All this stays. If we were to take this away, we'd be losing bit of carbon, because there is carbon there. We'd be also losing a bit of nitrogen, a bit of phosphate, a bit of potash. We'd be losing all the elements by taking it away. Even if we composted it, we would still be losing some because the process of composting generates heat and you get some losses. So it all stays here. It goes back on the ground. In the winter we dismantle everything, goes on the ground, and it would disappear. We have a very high population of earthworms and they will process that material. So by the time we get back here in the spring, what we'll be looking at is pretty much green all over. There'll be a strip where this material's rotted away. It might be a little bit bare. We'll do a light cultivation, and into that we'll be planting courgettes. So we'll plant 2 rows here, early ones, and then we'll do 3 more rows a bit later after that. And we have a spread of crops. We've got the spread here. We've got these 2 were sown probably about middle of April, and then the other 2 were sown direct. We didn't plant raise those, they were sown in situ. They were sown early in May when the ground warms up, and the last one was done in pots, was it? Yeah, a bit later because it's runner beans, and we really don't want runner beans until September because we've got French beans. Each of these crops only really produces a decent crop for about 3 weeks. That's true of nearly every crop we grow. Courgettes really only produce well for about 3 or 4 weeks, then it tails off. So we have different sowings in order to keep the season going because we want as long a season as possible. In an ideal world, if we were specialising in courgettes, we would sow courgettes every week for probably 10 weeks. But we're not specialising in courgettes, so we sow just 2 or 3 lots. So this succession is really important. The green manure here will get mown next year before we plant the courgettes, and it will be mown a couple of times during the season, but as I said, nothing gets taken away, everything gets left in situ because that's our fertility. If we take it away, we have to bring something back to replace it. The courgettes will thrive because the beans will have left a lot of organic material behind. There's also a residue of nitrogen there from the beans, not much, but there'll be a little bit there from the beans. So the courgettes, we don't feed plants. As I said earlier, we only feed soil. So we don't actually have to put anything on this soil at all. The green manure supplies everything. We only apply compost once within the whole rotation. Very small amounts, we're putting on sort of this much. So we're not using huge amounts of compost because there's a cost involved, there's an environmental cost in compost. Because we have limited quantities, we're targeting it at a point in the rotation when we have a green manure, when there's lots of earthworms, and lots of biological activity, when the soil can process that material. If you put compost onto bare soil, a lot of the material will get wasted. The nutrient can get washed out, and there's a risk of inflating phosphate and potash levels in the short term, and this can cause problems too. So it's really about feeding soil in a more natural way, in a way that it would get done naturally on a plain, or in a, when I say plain I mean like a savanna plain, grassland plain, or under a forest canopy where you've got continuous but small amounts of organic material topping up all the time. Rather than putting on huge amounts at any one time, we put on quite modest amounts. Nettles behind you can see it all looks a bit messy, but nettles are really essential. The trees that keep growing around the greenhouses are not essential, and we cut them down, believe it or not, every single year, and they still keep coming back. Ash trees just love being cut down every year. In the greenhouse we've just more or less finished the crop. It was carrots. There's still a few left. So we've been harvesting these now since, I'm just trying to think, since, well, more than 6 weeks we've been harvesting these. There was 24 rows of carrots, they sown direct. We're getting about 150, nearly 200 bunches a week. So we've harvested about 1,000 bunches of carrots from here. That's our first crop. Our second crop of carrots is in the field. They're ready now, but if we want early carrots, we have to do them in the greenhouse. We cannot get carrots before the end of June outdoors. This is something which people don't always realise, this seasonality of vegetables. Carrots, naturally, a season for carrots finishes in March. So you've got April, May and June, no carrots at all. But people see carrots in supermarkets because they're coming from abroad. So we're obviously trying to reduce that gap, the hungry gap as we call it, and the tunnels and the greenhouses make a, a huge contribution towards that. This is going to go into winter salads, which we won't sow for probably another 5 or 6 weeks. They'll be sown direct. In the meantime, we're going to have a very short green manure crop in here, and that'll be a flowering green manure crop of buckwheat and phacelia. It'll be sown next week. We allow it to flower. It grows really quickly in the tunnel. It'll be mown off, and that'll get worked into the ground, and then we'll be sowing into that afterwards. We've got one row of French beans which we've been picking for a couple of weeks. This is just ahead of the outdoor ones. They haven't done very well. They're quite useless crop actually this year. All the flowers dropped off. It was too hot. You know, not every crop works every year. You know, there are some things that go wrong occasionally. Usually try and blame it on the weather, but it's not always fair on the weather. But often it is to do with the weather, or it's very easy to find an excuse that's something to do with the weather. But yeah, it was a bit hot, so it didn't work too well. But they're still there, and we have started picking them just a week ago. They should really have been ready about a month ago. Yeah, once these start to crop well, the outdoor ones are also going to be cropping well, and we'll probably end up forgetting about these because we'll have too many outside. You know? Right, another really important flower, this one, any umbelliferous flower, these things with big umbel flower heads, beautiful. This is, it's not hogweed, is it, Romney?
It's hogweed.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's hogweed, yeah.
It's Fondillium rather than
It's not angelica, is it? No, it's hogweed.
No.
So you've got to be careful with this stuff.
That
This one's not
so
too bad, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
It can, if you've got scratches, I think it can. Right, move on. Been here a couple of weeks ago and looked at this lot, you would have seen an enormous number of ladybird larvae. They're all gone now, they're all gone to our crops. They've all moved out. But this is where the aphids hang out. As soon as this starts to grow in February, which it does, the aphids move in, and that's what brings predators in. So this is alive. We've identified, I don't know how many, someone came here and counted, I think, 8 or 9 different species of ladybird. George, did you do your netting thing?
I did, yeah.
What did you find?
Oh, all sorts. Loads of ichneumons, robber flies, which are
Robber
fantastic
flies?
pest
What are
control. They're these predatory flies, slow-flowing.
I've heard of
predatory
these,
flies,
yeah,
which
yeah.
pounce on sedentary insects. I've found a huge range of wasps. Lots of different
There's a
beetles.
lot of parasitic wasps.
Yeah, lots of parasitic wasps and ichneumons.
We've identified at least 5 or 6 live on cabbage white caterpillars. There's probably more actually. Yeah, George is a bit of an amateur entomologist, is that fair to say?
I suppose so.
Other sort of scientist.
Emphasis on the amateur in both cases.
Yeah, I walked quite fast. Did you see Darren?
No, but I got Zoe's going to text.
Oh,
Just when we're down.
Right, we're going to stop here. Before we go to the greenhouse, the tunnels, this is the onion part of the rotation. This is actually shallots, and these were plant raised. Romney grew these. These were plant raised and planted out in end of April. Well, you guys planted them, didn't you? End of April. Yeah. And they're ready, almost ready. We're just waiting for them to stop growing. Really, they're a bit lush. They're a bit big, if anything. Yeah, they'll be ready to harvest in probably about 3 weeks, and then we'll have to pull them, dry them. Hopefully, if it's dry. If it doesn't dry, we'll have to put them into trays and put them in a building somewhere and try and dry them out. They're a bit of a hassle, but they're a really good crop because they keep a long time. They'll keep right through till sort of May next year. It's a really useful crop. This bit of ground will then go back into green manure in the spring until the following spring, and then it will then go back into what goes in here next year. Can't remember. Oh, this is going to be salads here probably next year. Yeah, salads. The tunnels, we've got separate rotation in greenhouses and tunnels. It's a 5-year rotation, so tomatoes never come back to the same place more than 1 year in 5. It's really difficult to tunnel because we've got tomatoes and we've got peppers. They're both the same family, the Solanaceae family. They both share verticillium wilt, which is this effect. That's verticillium wilt. It started on the lower leaves. It affects some varieties more than others. Some varieties are completely immune. It's unfortunate that most of the older varieties, the heirloom varieties as they're called, get verticillium wilt really bad, which is one of the reasons we don't grow that many heirloom varieties for that reason. You know, there is a reason why they were outdated varieties. They weren't always that good. The modern varieties tend to be better in terms of disease resistance. This one is not a heirloom variety. This is a new one actually, which we may not grow again because of this. I mean, some varieties are almost completely resistant Some have got partial resistance and some have got no resistance at all.
Which
And-
variety is that one?
Avocado. So it does depend a lot on the season. You know, versium wilt some years doesn't show up at all. If the plants get stressed, like too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet, this becomes a problem. So the way we manage the plant is quite critical in terms of trying to reduce this disease, which is why we have the rotation. And also the compost would help. This is the result of badgers. This is what badgers do to your crop. This is why we've just put electric fence around. To keep them out, because we have suddenly realised in the last couple of days we've lost a huge amount of tomatoes. Tomatoes are a lot of work. They're a very valuable crop. They're one of our they are probably the, after strawberries, yeah, they are the probably second most valuable crop. In here we've got about 700 plants. I've lost track of how many varieties. It was going to be 5, but it ended up about 10. We've got all sorts of weird and wonderful things at the top, different colours.
Don't mention those.
Don't mention those, none of which are producing that well. But anyway, we'll talk about that. In an average year, you know, we expect to get maybe 1,500 kilograms from here, possibly more. Some years more. This year is not looking that great. It's not a busting yield. It's all right. It's not fantastic. They take a huge amount of work. I've forgotten how much work they took, but because Chris has not been here this week, I took over the tomato jar. I spent 10 hours here yesterday. De-leafing these and retying them, twisting them. You know, they don't do this on their own. They have to be twisted up the string. You've got to take the side shoots off. You've got to take the old leaves off. You know, chuck out the dodgy fruit the badgers have done. You know, I spent 10 hours on my hands and knees crawling around here, and I realised suddenly it's a lot of work. When I used to do it, we only had 2 rows. You know, now we've got 10 rows. So it's a lot of work, but most of the work now is done, and it's really about the picking, which is also a lot of work. You know, I mean, you spent a couple of hours picking yesterday, and then 2 hours packing them today. You know, these sort of crops, you know, it's not money for a rope. You know, they are high value crops, but every crop, the value of a crop is relative to how much time goes into producing it. That's how it works. The more time you put in, the better the value, but of course the more you have to find that time. So it's a really good crop. It's still, you know, our mainstay of the tunnels really. This is the best performing crop in tunnels usually, unless something goes disastrously wrong, which it hasn't done for a long time. So it is hugely useful. We've got permanent no-till in all bar 2. We're doing a trial here actually with no-till against raised beds, and this is a no-till situation where we're not doing any tillage at all. We just do very light hoeing. The pathways are kept in wood chip, and we put a little bit of compost on. The compost is very small amounts. We only do it every 4 or 5 years. We're not heaping on. You know, there's no dig system which uses this much compost every year. We don't go along with that. It's a really bad policy. Actually, it's really bad for soil. It's causing soil obesity, so we don't go for that. We're putting very small amounts on, targeting it at specific parts of the rotation really. It's all about feeding the soil, not the plant. So the small amount of compost which has been put on here, this has been done. A lot of it's gone already. It disappears very quickly. We have quite a good earthworm population in tunnels, which is unusual. Most tunnels tend to be, even organic ones, tend to be nearly devoid of earthworms because there's a lot of cultivations, a lot of soil movement, a lot of crop removal. They get very heavily used. A lot of people walking around. They get a lot of irrigation. You know, it's quite an intensive situation. So, although it is a very unnatural way of growing food, you know, we wouldn't normally have a crop like this. It does mean we can get out of season cropping, which we wouldn't get if we only relied on the outdoors. Outdoor cropping in this country, things like tomatoes, if you're lucky in a good year you might get 3 weeks. Here we'll be picking these now until at least the middle of November. It will slow down, but we will have fruit right up to the middle of November. Some years it's even gone almost to Christmas, not quite. I think one year we did get to Christmas week. They're not very good, they're a bit small, they're not that tasty, but they are tomatoes, you know. So it's a very long season crop. This year is 2 weeks earlier than we've ever had. In fact, everything has been 2 weeks earlier. Our strawberries this year started on the middle of April, which was 2 weeks away, even possibly more than 2 weeks from where it used to be when we started 40 odd years ago. I mean, the seasons have definitely moved, but also varieties have improved as well. We've got a lot of calendula growing here because this is a pretty sterile environment. We don't have big areas of beetle banks in here, but we've got little pockets of biodiversity, flowers each end. We've got a few in the rows as well, and there's always a bit of weed cover. Weed cover is really good. up to a point. We don't allow it when plants are small, but once plants are established, we allow weed cover because it's biodiversity again. You know, this Zinnian caterpillar is only in there because we've got weeds, you know. It wouldn't be there otherwise. So if you go in there, you'll see there's lots of predators. There's parasitic wasps, there's all sorts of stuff going on in there. Slugs, not a problem. We've got loads of ground beetles. I say that because I know someone's going to ask me what do you do about slugs, because that's always a big problem, you know, for most growers is slugs. We don't have a problem hardly ever. I say hardly ever. Occasionally there's a problem. The main reason being we have a lot of ground beetles, a lot of predatory ground beetles, which are living on slug eggs and baby slugs. That's how it works. And the reason we have those, we have areas of green manure, we've got areas untidy corners. You know, you can be too tidy. You know, if you're too tidy, you kind of create this barren landscape which insects don't want to live on. So you know, a bit of weed in the right place is really important, but we tend to keep it in its place. So you know, this biodiversity, this wild biodiversity, is actually quite heavily managed. I'm the ultimate control freak, you see. You know, I want to manage biodiversity to my advantage and try and make it work for us as a part of the whole system. You know, it's not something we just kind of add. It's not a bolt-on extra, it's part of the whole system. Have you seen the red kites around there?
Yeah, wow, they're amazing.
Yeah, you wait till we get down the field, they all follow us down there. You know? Probably about 8,000 or 10,000 plants there. They're almost big enough. So we just pull the whole lot up, bundle them up into 50s, cut the tops off, stick them back in the ground, and they'll be our winter crop. We've got another seed bed outside. So we've got 3 sowings of leeks. We did some in the greenhouse, early plants, and then we've had some, no, this is the 4th sowing of leeks actually. We've got 4 sowings of leeks, all different varieties. Nice little plant. So we're using the greenhouses and tunnels also for plant raising, which is really important because it means we don't have to buy in from outside. Pathways here are kept topped up with wood chip, which we do every couple of years, and then we just harrow in the beds. We don't do any digging or forking. It's all very much surface cultivation. We've got a few odd tomatoes here which weren't supposed to be there, but we had too many plants this year. Some of the varieties we've had in the past are very prone to wilt. These tend to be quite free of wilt. In fact, you almost never see it. It may slightly reduce the yield, but it doesn't have a huge effect. These were all sown in the greenhouse. These were sown back in middle of February. We're just about to start picking at the top. There's some nearly ready. By next week we'll be starting that crop. So some of these things take a long time. You know, the tomatoes we sowed in February, you know, we've only just started picking them. This is 6 months, 5 months later. It's quite a long time to wait, you know. These are going to get strung. We need to put strings around them to stop them falling around because they go all over the place. And then we just keep it hoed for a while. Eventually we just stop hoeing, we just let whatever weeds grow will grow on their own, and we're not really too bothered about a few weeds around. Once the crop's established, we don't really get too stressed out about weeds. You'll see the difference at the end here, how small the plants are. And that's simply because of the draft that's coming in here, the cooler air. And we have to leave these open. We can't shut these because of the problem with disease. So, you know, disease is always a present, you know, a constant threat, and it's primarily down to attention to ventilation. So these are kept open pretty much all summer long. We only close these if it got really windy, really strong winds, or very cold, which it can occasionally. But in general, they're kept open most of the summer. If you close them at night, you get diseases building up really quickly, and these crops can suffer badly from poor ventilation. So we put out the ones at the end being a bit small. They'll catch up in a few weeks' time. They'll eventually get there. They'll just be slightly later. But you can see the difference, the gradient as it goes up. Top of the tunnel, if you stood there now, it's probably 10 degrees warmer up there, much warmer, because the heat is rising to the top. And there'll be a sort of blast of hot air coming out the doors. So having them on the slope actually works really well. This was something I didn't realise until we put them up here. They're accidental, really. It's beautiful effect, convection. So you've got the cool air coming in here, the hot air going out the top. It's brilliant. Because normally if these were on the flat, this would be really hot in the summer. It'd be too hot, and crops would suffer. I mean, a couple of weeks ago we had we had in the garden 32, 33 degrees. In here it might have got to 40, 45. Much too hot for tomatoes. They hate that. You know, that's much too hot. Cucumbers are okay, but tomatoes hate getting too hot. So, you know, it's important to try and keep the temperature down. We've got drip irrigation in these. We're always trying to find better ways of using water. Our water is one of our biggest, in the garden here, it's one of our biggest expenses. We're on mains water, and it's costing about £4 or £5 a year. It's a lot of money. So we're always looking at ways of trying to reduce water consumption. It's problematical because as soon as you start reducing water consumption, you start using more and more plastic. And it seems no easy way out of this. You gain in one way, you lose somewhere else. So we've yet to be convinced of the properties of using trickle irrigation may not be as smart as we thought it was. So this is where all the propagation gets done, and I think it's about 40 or 50,000 plants this year, I think I did. And this is strawberry plants, which is our own stock, and these are to be planted out quite soon, so they've been mist-propagated. This gives us a really early plant. We get a really good crop. We'll get at least 350, 400 grams from this next year, which we need in the first year because it's quite an expensive thing to grow, strawberries. So it's a really early crop, and they've been done under this mist propagation, which we set up especially for this. They're looking really nice. In fact, we just turned the mister off because they can now go outside. This is our own compost. This is made from wood chip and a bit of vermiculite. Nothing else added. There's no fertiliser or anything added to that. Strawberries love wood chip. And then during the rest of the year, this will be all full up. It's more or less empty now, but Romney's still doing the last few bits of lettuce. So we've got 700 lettuce here. These were pricked out a week ago, were they? Or
about that.
And these will be ready to
Variety.
plant, I guess, in about 10 days. So we've planted those. That'll be the next planting. And then there'll be more to come after that. I think there's 2 varieties here, isn't there?
Yeah, there's 2 and I'm doing a 3rd now.
Yeah, so I think we've probably done we would have done 6 or 7 varieties of lettuce this season. In here we've got some fennel, which we've just done today, very recently. Yeah, so Romney just pricked these out. There's about 1,000, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, 12 trays.
And they'll
I think
be
I can
cropping.
squeeze in the
We'll be
13th.
cropping those from about end of September, and they'll go right through till sort of near Christmas. Fennel is a good crop for us. It will fill up whatever space we have in the tunnels. So they're a really useful crop. It produces a beautiful bulb. We get really nice fennel here. See, some soil types are more suited to some crops than others. So we know which crops do best and which ones don't do so well. So we try and concentrate more on the ones that do better if possible. Strawberries, they love it here, despite the fact the soil's not really suitable for them. They love it here because I think they love the wood chip. So yeah, beautiful little plants. Where we keep all the tools for the garden, but also where we do the mixing for the plant raising compost, and this is just wood chip and vermiculite, nothing else, nothing added. This is pure wood.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what you get if you compost wood. And it's been sieved. So it's been through a rotary sieve. Then it's mixed with vermiculite through the mixer, and that's what we use for the propagation. So we do occasionally add a little bit of organic fertiliser to things like leeks and onions because they need a long time in the module, but we don't use anything for most of a crop. So it's a very low input material, which is all basically from local sources, apart from the vermiculite, which is imported from Portugal. So the rest of it here is tools. This is all the tools we use for the wall garden. The hoe gets quite a bit of use, more so in the garden and the field. We don't do a lot of hand hoeing in the field, it's more sort of mechanised, but we do a fair bit. You've done a fair bit, isn't it?
Quite a lot.
Yeah, nice and shiny, you see. Keep nice and shiny here. This soil is not easy to hoe. It's very stony. You want to see what we've got in the field in way of stone. So it can be quite energetic.
Yeah, can be.
Yeah. And then we've got push hoes. I mean, some of this stuff has been here for 100 years or more. Actually, I brought this one with me. I mean, this we use on larger areas in the garden. This thing we use for making furrows for planting into. We've got kind of a semi-mechanised hand planting system which relies on some tools and some human effort. Marking tools, so we've got things like this for marking rows, so we can mark four in one go. We can change it for different sizes, so it saves a lot of mess about. A lot of people spend hours walking up down the string lines, we only put one line up and mark out all the rows together. Makes it a little bit easier. Yeah, we've got the wheel, but I don't know what happened to the wheelbarrow. This has been hanging here since Victorian times, I think, Some of this stuff I inherited when I came here. This old seed drill, which we still occasionally use, is from 1925.
Right, wow.
I've got the original receipt, and it was £19.35. It was £19.90 and 6, and that in today's money is about £1,500. That's what that would cost today.
Wow.
Which goes to show how expensive things were, you know, compared with what we get now. We get all this cheap stuff in China. We just don't know how well off we are in terms of tools. You know, we can go buy really good kit for not much money these days. You know, whereas in those days, you know, that would be a major investment in this garden. In fact, it would have been one of the few pieces of mechanisation they had back in the 30s. So, you know, it just goes to show how things have changed. I mean, we do have some machinery in the garden, it's small scale machinery, but it makes a huge difference to what we can do. It really does. I mean, years ago, it was all done by hand, everything, even the initial cultivations. Yeah, the rest of the tools are all pretty simple things. There's nothing very high tech here at all. We use bulb planters for planting pots, so all our pots are the same size, but they're square, not round. So we're banging a square pot in a round hole, which actually does work very well. So we try to reduce how much physical effort goes into these crops, primarily because it costs us, as a company, it costs us to pay people, of course. So we like to be reasonably efficient in terms of tool use. It's quite important. But you know, hand tools are great. I mean, hand tools are so easy to manage. You know, everyone can learn to use them. They're easy repaired. They're cheap. You know, when you get into machinery, you move into a different sort of ball game. Really, it gets much more complicated. You know, you have to have people who can understand machines, and a lot of people nowadays have got no idea how machines work. There's a whole generation growing up and know nothing about machines, which is a worry, you know, because they are part of our life, whether you like them or not, you know. And you can't do everything by hand. There are some things which have to be mechanised.
Join us on part 2 of the tour of Tolhurst Organic Farm, where we will visit the rest of the farm. Please send your questions to events@veganorganic.net. Tour of Tolhurst Organic Farm, part 2, Thursday, July the 1st, 7 p.m.